Welcome to the Artefacto YouTube channel. Today, we're excited to share a masterclass by one of the most talented watercolor artists in the world. Please welcome Harsh Agrawal.
This is a mixture of cerulean blue and cobalt blue, keeping it slightly warmer and much thinner. And I will start from top of the screen, keeping the mixture very thin and fluid. At this stage, I'm using a soft brush. So you can see it creates a bit of, it leaves a bit of the paper, like bits and pieces. It doesn't cover entirely, and that's intentional because it makes it look a bit more fresh as we go down. So this is a pre-painting stage where you can see I'm using a lot more water and very little pigment. And I'm slowly adding more and more water as I get down, and what that does is it creates lighter values. Right. So here I'm experimenting with adding a bit of red or purple as we go further down. The top is going to be more of the warmer cerulean blue. So I've taken a bit more red and added that into the mixture. And this is very subtle variation in color. So you can see I'm adding, this color is Rose Madder Genuine. It's a lovely transparent tone that mixes well with most pigments. So I'm adding a bit more yellow and red as we go closer to the horizon. So you can already see it started like a nice gradient from top to bottom, going from darker sort of warm blue to more reds and yellows as we go down to the horizon. Mm-hmm. And I'm really focused on the lighter colors of the painting at this stage.
Harsh.
Yep.
Can you just see for a second the reference photo you were sharing, if it's not difficult for you? The one that you used, you showed us.
You mean the painting itself?
The painting, yes, the painting, yeah. Or if it's difficult, that's okay.
I'm not sure if I can send the file somehow. Sorry.
Okay, let me see if I can share it in the chat.
Yeah, if you...
Yeah, I'll share it in the chat, Harsh, don't worry.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So as I go down, you can see I'm adding my lights. I'm really focused on lights because areas which are going to be dark, I'm not too focused on because it will be covered up and I can still rectify it. But the areas which are light in value, they're pretty much going to stay as is in the final painting. So anywhere you have, in the evening scene especially, or nocturnes even, wherever you have a light source or areas that you know are going to be lighter value, you want to drop in wet and wet so that it's nice and transparent and you can see the paper through. And this is going to create much more luminous looking paintings. So you can see my paper is still quite wet as I'm dropping all these different pigments onto the paper. One thing you would also notice just now, I dropped in yellows into the dark itself. And because the paper is wet, it pushes the darker pigments away, creating that bloom effect. So even though for most cases you work light to dark in watercolors, but you should also not be afraid to go in the opposite direction if need be. So yeah, it's actually not that bad. Like you would be able to rectify most mistakes. As I know a lot of people think that with watercolors you're not, you know, you lock in and once you make a mistake it's kind of ruined. But I think for the most part you can even lift your pigment, you can drop in more water, you can wipe it, scrape it with your fingers, and so just try to be more confident when you're placing your brushwork and not too concerned about um, ruining a certain area which was supposed to be light.
I hope you're enjoying this watercolor lesson. On our channel, we always share watercolor lessons from the world's top artists. And today, we have something special for you. Follow the link in the video description and sign up for a free online masterclass with another global watercolor star.
So for my darks, I'm adding in a bit more reds and purples with some cobalt blue and a touch of ultramarine blue as I get closer to the street. You'll notice I'm getting more careful painting as I get closer to the cars and my focal points, because that's the area which I know the viewer is going to be looking at more closely. So I just want to make sure that gets more love than the other parts of the painting, so to speak. For this for the streets, I'm again like putting the underwash, and you'll notice my brush strokes are actually quite quick, and that's if I actually make it slower, it would be more difficult because a quick brush stroke um, is easier to get straighter lines, and they look more confident. Even if they're not straight, they have a certain energy to it. So I would try to just be confident and go for it instead of worrying about if you're able to make a straight line or not. Just think of your start and end points and create one brush stroke in a flick. I'm using plain water to soften some of the edges. If I don't like a hard edge somewhere, I would just use plain water and go over it. That's another thing with watercolors is um, you put up like a certain color or a stroke, and then you almost have to predict because the watercolor keeps doing its thing. It keeps mixing on paper. It's going to keep expanding, and then once it's dry, it's going to look slightly different, like slightly dull. So you would have to, add a bit more pigment than you need, and also be really mindful of how much water is in your brush, how much water is in the paper. Taking a bit more water and white and yeah, just splattering it onto the paper. And it creates that sort of sparkle, like even in distant buildings, and people would be like, "Oh, is that tiny windows? Is it, what is it?" Or just for texture, even, right? So it's it gives it a bit more life and makes it look less stiff, essentially. Yeah, so I'm just gonna assign.
Signing.
Yeah, that's a good way to not overwork. That's another thing which can happen is you end up overworking your painting. So a lot of times I'm just gonna sign it and be like, okay, hey,
Yes.
Harsh, stop, you know. this is good enough. So essentially, in terms of reference, I think I wanted to create something which was very similar to this painting in terms of the mood and the atmosphere. And before I dive into the demo, I would like to show you a bit of the process of how you can sort of create your own painting, even though you might not have an exact reference, because I think that's very important for me as an artist when I do plein air painting, what I see when I'm outside setting up my easel. I try to capture what I get the feeling of, and I'm also I also feel very free to sort of move things around that I see in order to tell my own story. I think that's very important for me as an artist because
Yes.
otherwise I would just take a photograph and create a print, which
Just
is
copy,
much
yes.
easier.
Yeah.
So give me a second. So here, what I would like to start with, the first thing that I start with obviously is what I'm painting on. So in this case, I'm doing a vertical composition. So I would do my layout in terms of my ratios and proportions. And then the first thing I would do for a cityscape is I would figure out where my horizon line is, which in this case, I would want it to be sort of like a lower thirds. We all know the rule of thirds where we divide the paper into three, we place our focal points in these areas. And essentially I'm just looking at big shapes and how I want to structure it. So in this situation, I would probably keep my horizon here. So that means the bottom part will become the street and this will be the sky. And then I'm also thinking of where to keep my vanishing point. This is where, when you see a row of street lights, they kind of vanish to a point, or any scene, it doesn't matter. So in this case, I'm keeping it slightly to the right. I don't want to keep it dead center in this situation. So we're not exactly trying to create the reference that we see on the right. I'm structuring a different scene. So for what we're gonna paint today, I thought I would just move the camera a bit to the left. So now that you have these perspective lines, you can kind of structure like, okay, I want to have some buildings on the screen right. I can probably have some buildings over here, some lines, and I would then spend some time drawing out like how I want my buildings to be. Now in this situation, you don't have to worry too much about exact architecture, where to place the windows and all these things. I think you can get away with a lot, especially when you're painting in sort of an impressionist way. Like even if I put like a couple of these marks, they already, they're good enough representation of windows. And so even me drawing a couple of lines here, you can see is already going to give you an illusion that there is a bunch of buildings here, right? And it's super easy. So I would like you not to be too stressed about each and every detail, especially here, and focus more on areas where we want the viewer to focus on. So in this scene, it's sort of like post-rain, almost sun is setting, and then you have these cafe lights coming up and they're reflecting on the streets. And you have these, maybe we'll put some New York, yellow taxis over here. So those are my more of areas of focus. So when I'm sketching, I would try to put more detail in areas that are of high contrast, areas that people are more interested in, and areas where I don't care so much about the story. I'm just gonna be very gestural and abstract even,
Excuse me, Harsh, there's a
Mhm.
question about your program.
Yeah.
Is it a Photoshop or what is it that you're using?
Yes, this is Photoshop. You can
Yes.
use, iPad. You can do. I mean, I usually do this with pencil and paper. It's just for this presentation.
Yeah. So
It's
this is
easy to
Photoshop.
communicate. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So here, then I would, again, I don't want to dive too much into composition and the narrative side of things, but I thought I would give you a peek into the preparation of the painting before we dive in to help. So here's a tiny little sketch which, using the same process, you can see where our, horizon was and where we kept some of the lines. And it's very few lines. It's not that complicated. I have some vertical lines here, and they're much closer together as we go far into the distance. And then as we get closer to the camera, you can see the gap is quite big. At the same time, I have some of these perspective lines going in. And this is good enough to suggest like a downtown of a city, you know.
Right.
And then for the cars, because they are going to be more focal point details, I did use some reference, as you can see over here on my screen. So I like the way there is this like one New York taxi. It's a bit too high contrast. I also don't like that FedEx, you know, truck in the back. So I feel free to sort of move this. And I'm only focusing on these three cars in the center, and that's what I would probably be sketching in my painting. So I just put some cars here. I will add some people, some reflection, maybe this person going on a bicycle. And yeah, so overall, this is kind of my main, this is like how detailed I would sketch initially when I start. I don't go, like this is already way too detailed for me.
Too detailed.
And
Yes.
what I would, at this stage, even though we have a good structure, we have perspective, and we have already done the thinking process ahead of time, so that then when we dive into the painting, you don't have to think about these things. You have already taken care of your ratios, proportions. You have taken care of, you know, your perspective and how big or small different things are and stuff like that. So the next step is like I would then maybe do a value study, but it's not necessary. What a value study is basically I would go in with like some crays and color this up. So when I'm doing with pen and paper, I can use like an ink, or you can use a marker, or even just with pencil. You're able to do this. So and what this allows for is for you to already decide that this is my area of high contrast, and you know, and what I mean by that is you can see that my lightest light of the painting is right here, which is like some of these lights, and then also my darkest dark is right here. And what that does is it instantly puts your viewer's eye exactly in these locations. So I'm essentially pre-planning where, and I'm trying to dictate where the viewer is going to see or look into my painting when they view this. So obviously, there's a lot more to talk about in terms of the concept of harmony, composition, and other things. But I feel like I would like today's topic to be more focused on the atmosphere, the mood, and also watercolor. So we will focus more on that for this demo. But yeah, if you have any questions related to thumbnailing or how to create something like this, feel free to ask. But what you would notice here, the only two references I used was this painting because I wanted to create this mood, and then some of the references for the car to be able to create. And this information that I have in the thumbnail is more than enough to start a painting.
Okay.
Yeah.